Hey everyone, it's Michael Kikle. I hope you're doing well today, and I have a review here for a movie from 2013 that when it came out, people trashed it all over the internet. And I still wanted to see it. You know, it's one of those things where no matter what anybody else says, you want to take out the time and watch it because it kind of looked cool. And this is before I even began to watch westerns. You know, aside from like 310 to Yuma, I tried Appaloosa and it was awful. But this little film here is from, again, 2013, and it's called The Lone Ranger. It's a remake of an old TV show, and I think maybe some pulps. I could be wrong. Uh, but it is a big action-packed western, basically. Kind of a buddy movie, too, which is really great, too. I have to tell you, I gotta admit, up front, this is so underrated. It has massive flaws. I'll talk about that throughout my review, but this is a massively underrated movie, in my opinion. One that I think people never really gave the real chance that it deserved. And if anything, now, watching movie reviews on YouTube out of the big YouTubers and whatnot, if anything ever proved the point that a lot of them are just like guys who wanted like MCU movies and shit, and I love and respect most of those guys that I'm talking about too, if this doesn't show the point that those guys didn't even like a big action-packed, made-for-mainstream modern-day audiences Western, I don't know what else could show that they missed the point of the movie. This was a fun film, and it's directed by Gore Verbinski, who did the first three Pirates of the Caribbean films. I really enjoy those. I think they're really, really great. Probably better than this, to be honest, but it's been a while since I've watched any of them, so I don't know if I can say that confidently. But, you know, I respect Gore Verbinski, and I actually wish he had the opportunity to do more movies, because I think he does a really great job with kind of weird, strange concepts like Pirates of the Caribbean, or this in that case. And everything from the casting of this movie to some of the subject matter, apparently there was a $200 million or $250 million budget on this movie, which is insane. You have to understand, this is 2013, and like less than 5 or 6 years before this, we had The Dark Knight when I was in middle school. The Dark Knight was known as one of the most expensive movies, if not the most expensive movie, if I believe, made at that time for $100 million, which shows how insanely humongous budgets have been bloated up to over the years. So anyway, The Lone Ranger here, I have, again, no experience with anything from this show, the magazines, whatever they had for it back in the day. I don't even know the damn theme song to the Lone Ranger TV show. I think it's at the end of the movie. This movie, I mean, but I don't know. I heard people say that. I don't know if that's true or not. Anyway, I guess getting on to the the casting itself. It stars Johnny Depp as Tonto, who's like an Indian wearing war paint, which was kind of cool. And you have Army Hannibal Lecter, the cannibal, Hammer here. Now, I love Johnny Depp, but I've never experienced Army Hammer do anything in movies as far as I can remember. I've always known about like the horrific cannibal shit, and that's like the only thing I knew about Army Hammer. And I knew before that he kind of vanished from movies, too. I didn't really see him show up in anything for a long, long time. But that still didn't sway me away from wanting to see this film. He looked like he'd be a good fit for the role. And to be fair, he does a really good job. You know, Johnny Depp is doing kind of like a Jack Sparrow mixed in with an Indian voice type of thing, which was kind of fun to me because I still love Jack Sparrow. And I still love Johnny Depp, too. They're a really good blend together for this kind of, again, they're not really friends, but kind of become friends by the end of the movie thing, you know, with this. The movie is 2.5 hours long, which is one of its greatest sins. It doesn't need to be 2.5 hours long. However, I have to tell you, the pacing is phenomenal. It flies by, dude. You couldn't make this movie underneath 2 hours. You couldn't do it, because it has so much to juggle. It's an origin story. It's setting up this friendship with Tonto and, whatever the Lone Ranger's real name is. I can't even remember. Is it like John, I think? Anyway, it has a lot to juggle between those two things, setting up a great villain played by William Sphincter, I guess is his name. I don't know what the fuck his name is. But he plays like a cannibal, you know, which is horrific. He leads a bunch of henchmen, bad guys that are all loons. And he himself, like I said, eats people. It's also juggling a revenge story atop all these action set pieces and stuff. This movie had a ton to do. And it's not like, I mean, you could have made the movie a little bit easier on everybody, made it less than 2.5 hours by just having it immediately start up with Tonto and the Lone Ranger being buddies already, and just introduce to us that whole concept very lightly. But this was made for a whole new generation, you know what I mean? People like my age who had never known anything about this. And again, I think it's unfairly hated, man. I guess I'll go ahead and get into the plot here. Basically, the film opens up with a wraparound story that is completely, absolutely unnecessary to this film, makes no sense why we even have it as part of the movie. Johnny Depp is in old man makeup, and a little boy wearing the original Lone Ranger costume wanders into like a circus museum thing, a carnival museum, whatever, and realizes that this wax figure of Johnny Depp is actually alive, and it begins to tell him all of these stories about he and the Lone Ranger's adventures and how they met. That whole portion of the film, weaved throughout the story and at the end, it should have been cut. There is no reason at all this shit was included in the film. It's one of those things that feels like something you'd pick up in the novelization of this movie. You know what I mean? But not in the real movie, because it doesn't need to be there. It's in the 1900s, like 1920 or 1930, but then it does a whole flashback to the 1800s when the Lone Ranger was coming to town before he became the Lone Ranger, obviously. He's like the DA or something. And he's on a train that gets hijacked by a villain, the villain I talked about, Butch or whatever his name is, the cannibal. His team are coming to rescue him because he's on the train. He's sitting beside Johnny Depp, who's also being held captive by the law for some reason. They tell you that in the film. It's kind of fun. And there's a big escape scene. And Butch gets out, the sheriff people holding him hostage on the train by law. They get killed. Tonto barely survives. The Lone Ranger, who's not the Lone Ranger yet, Army Hammer, I guess I'll just keep calling him in the meantime, he gets involved in this situation, barely survives too. Well, he and Tonto get off the train. They barely make it. They go separate ways. And the Army Hammer meets up with his brother, who's apparently a big law enforcement guy. He makes him a ranger and has him working with him. So then, later on in the movie, like we're talking like 40 minutes into the film, this is how long it takes to get to this particular portion here. It turns into the revenge story. Army Hammer and like his brother and all of their friends, they get shot and killed, basically. Supposedly, Army Hammer dies. I guess you could say that. It looks like he gets shot in the heart. I don't know. But while he's dying, he happens to open his eyes and see Butch, the villain, carve out his brother's heart. And they don't show this. The film has, like, no blood at all. But they seem to imply, by the way he wipes his mouth, that he cut this dude's raw heart out of his body and ate it. Because you don't see the heart laying around. You didn't see him put it back in the guy. That, as gruesome as that sounds, you never saw anything like that. So I guess they're implying that he ate the guy's heart. I guess, I don't know. But anyway, PG-13 hurt this movie in some ways, but I understand why it was PG-13. So those guys roam away. Army Hammer is supposedly dead. Johnny Depp sees all this go down and decides to bury the bodies of everybody involved. And there's a white, majestic horse that you hear Army Hammer's brother telling him about. It's kind of like an urban legend locally, that this white, beautiful horse will find a man with a pure heart and have it be like its owner, I guess. It shows up at the gravesite when Johnny Depp's about to bury all of these guys, including Army Hammer. And it goes over to Army Hammer's grave and basically is like, this is the guy. This is who I need to work with me. That, every interaction of this movie involving Johnny Depp and this horse is great. There's stuff from the trailers and whatever that were so funny. Johnny Depp making these great Indian lines, dude, they're so fucking good. Like, there's this one line, he's like, something is wrong with that horse. It's great, man. I love it. Johnny Depp is so fucking funny in this movie, dude. But he tells the horse when he keeps going over to Army Hammer's grave, he's like, no, dumb horse. He takes it over to the other brother that's dead, the one that had his heart eaten, and he's like, this good brother, that dumb brother. Some shit like that. Dude, I was laughing my ass off in the basement here where I watched it. And man, it was just so funny. It was so funny in every possible way. Again, that camaraderie that eventually develops between Armie Hammer and Johnny Depp is so well done here. But it turns out Armie Hammer's not dead. He jump scares the audience and Johnny Depp. So the horses picked him. And apparently there's a new urban legend, also, not new, but like a new one that's introduced to us, that apparently the Lone Ranger, Armie Hammer in this case, is a ghost walker or spirit walker, some shit like that. I can't even remember. It's been a few days since I watched the movie. Couldn't get the review just the way I wanted it, so here I am trying again. But it turns out that apparently Armie Hammer can get shot, but can't die now, because he may have already died. They don't really know. And that seems to be put to the test. So there's a mild supernatural angle to this that may or may not be true. We can debate that. I think anybody could debate that. Maybe the future sequels were gonna kinda delve into that. But again, $200 million budget, and Disney was expecting a Western to do well. I understand their crazy fantasy pirates movies did super well because of Gore Verbinski and the concept. In the 90s, everybody I knew loved Goosebumps, Harry Potter, and this, and then eventually the Star Wars prequels when they came around too. And that was it. You know, for new concepts, you had Goosebumps, Harry Potter, and you had Pirates of the Caribbean, and they were all really big deals, you know what I mean? Huge deals. I remember my friend Casey having a backpack for Pirates of the Caribbean. She was a huge Johnny Depp fan, but she just loved Pirates of the Caribbean. She was a diehard fan, man. We're talking action figures, keychains, played the fucking video games, for God's sake. How bad could that have been? Haven't even played one of those. I played the Lego Pirates game. It's pretty good, you know? But anyway, Lone Ranger basically, again, turns into a revenge buddy cop movie at this point. And Johnny Depp tells Armie Hammer, you gotta wear the mask and stuff, now that you're kind of not, you know, covert by any means, but like, it's to confuse your enemies. Like, he doesn't really have any, like, people left anymore. So, like, there's no real reason to hide his identity or anything. Pretty much everybody knows exactly who he is when they encounter him, except for, like, Indian tribes and stuff. But again, Armie Hammer really does a great job here. The thing is I feel bad for older people who grew up on the Lone Ranger TV show and stuff, because they go to see something like this, or like my dad when he saw Man of Steel, and it's not the character they grew up with, who's just the manly, cool, badass dude who just knows how to do everything. I agree with people who criticize this film and say that Tonto seems like the guy who knows how to do everything, even though he's doing magic, and he's doing, like, this weird thing feeding this fucking bird that's dead on top of his head, which is fun for comedic parts of it, but it gets annoying seeing him spread fucking grain and corn over his head constantly to feed a dead bird. Tonto feels like the real hero, and Armie Hammer's Lone Ranger feels like the sidekick. It should be flipped around. Maybe you could have had like a spin-up like Lone Ranger saves Tonto from something, like bad white guys or something in this case. I don't know. You could have done something to make it not feel like Johnny Depp is leading Armie Hammer, and I feel like that's a massive mistake with every movie nowadays that tries to bring life back to an older IP. It seems like a big problem for this movie, in my opinion. I've seen that in other things too, obviously, like the Star Wars sequels, like what they did with Luke, obviously in Last Jedi, having Rey best fucking Luke Skywalker. Get the hell out of here. That kind of stuff is sinful amongst the community and the hardcore fans like myself. I could see people being pissed who grew up on Lone Ranger and seeing that shit done here, just like my dad was with the Christopher Reeve Superman versus the Man of Steel Henry Cavill writing, you know what I mean? And even though I love Man of Steel, it's my favorite Superman film, I could see somebody growing up on like the Kirk Allen Superman serials or the Christopher Reeves movies and being pissed over how they wrote Superman for Man of Steel. I think that's the big reaction that a lot of people have negatively to the Zack Snyder work. I really do believe that. I don't think it's shit like, oh, it's depressing and emo. I don't think that's what it is. I really think it's because of nostalgia bias, you know? But anyway, Lone Ranger, it's a great flick. I really recommend it, even though it's way too long. It's easily over an hour and probably 10 minutes. Not an hour and 10 minutes. It's easily probably over 40 minutes longer than it needs to be. I think 1 hour and 50 minutes, 2 hours would probably be about the sweet spot, you know what I mean? But you couldn't do it at an hour and a half. There's too much happening here, unless you completely rewrote the story. But everything from the villain with William Fincher, whatever the dude's name is that plays the bad guy here. He's the guy from Dark Knight, matter of fact, that I mentioned earlier. He's the guy that the Joker put the smoke grenade in his mouth in the beginning of the film and then drove the school bus away in the bank. He's a great actor. He's phenomenal here as the villain. He is super menacing. Probably one of the best villain portrayals I've ever seen in a Disney movie. And he's creepy. He's really genuinely creepy. The way they did his lips up and makeup. Oh, he's creepy, dude. But anyway, The Lone Ranger was a blast. If you're like me and you're looking for more, something we don't really get anymore, more pulpy types of adventures, like, again, back in the day, like the black and white movie serials, or like, pulp heroism in general. I've really gotten into that the last couple of years, like with Solomon Kane and Conan the Barbarian. I almost said Conan O'Brien, but that's not what I meant. I've been getting into that. Robert E. Howard, reading pulp stories. I want to check out The Shadow sometime. I've actually bought a couple of Doc Savage novels, which are really actually just pulps. They're like maybe 150 pages. I've been picking up some of those from stores and stuff locally, and I'm really hoping they'll be good. I've always wanted to get into pulps more now that I realize my taste the older I get. And I'm finding some cool stuff, man. I'm really loving pulp heroism. It's that classical good versus evil stuff that I think makes a lot more sense for tales. And I feel like it gets rid of this weird gray area that everybody wants everything to be. This movie doesn't play in that gray area. It's straight out as like, there are good people and there are bad people. There are corrupt people and there are truthful, honest people. And I love that about it. The Lone Ranger doesn't shy away from traditional values in that sense. And one of the biggest things, too, is a tack onto this review that I have to talk about. By the way, apparently Hans Zimmer did the music. It's really nice for the whole film, I would say. There's this one melody that plays every time something badass happens. It is such a great modernization of what Western music should be in movies for Westerns. It's really great. Love that part. But one of my favorite parts of the world building of this movie is that they even kept, like, those current day 1800s values for this Western. For example, there's even a scene of people praying together. And like they're doing like the Lord's Prayer and stuff, thanking God for a meal. Did you ever go into a Disney movie in 2013 expecting them to keep the period accurate as a period piece? I never in a million years would have thought of that they would have done that, because it just seems like a crime nowadays to do something like that, even though it's realistic for a film that isn't realistic. You know what I mean? It was great. I was super shocked by that. It really kind of moved me in a very strange, odd way, The Lone Ranger, though, I had a blast, and again, I know this is a super rambly long review, but I had so much to say about it. This was a blast and a half, dude. If you haven't seen The Lone Ranger, do not listen to motherfuckers on YouTube and whatnot that tell you this is bad. They're the same assholes, a lot of the time, who get paid off to say things like Halloween Ends or The Last Jedi are good movies. Don't listen to these motherfuckers. Go watch any movie that even slightly piques your interest when you can, before you completely write it off like I did with The Lone Ranger, because some clown you've never met and probably never will meet told you it's not very good. Don't listen to them. Check out everything you actually have an interest in, because you might find something that, in my case, 12 years later on down the road, I'm finding out was a hidden gem that I just so happened to luck out and buy a used, new, actually, I don't think FYE knew this, from a mall. And people could have never told me I would have enjoyed this as much as I did. It seems like no one I know in personal life has seen this movie. I don't remember anybody seeing it back in 2013 when I was in school, when I was still in high school, So it's kind of surprising to me. But what a blast, man. I'm going to rewatch this so much. Not this year, obviously, but when I get around to finishing up my backlog of movies and shows over the next year or so, dude, I'll be watching this so much. I really will, because it's a blast, dude. It's a fucking gem. I can't believe people don't talk about this movie more. So anyway, have you seen The Lone Ranger? What do you think about it? Do you love it? Do you hate it? Let me know everything you think about it and the potential sequels that could have been down below. Do you like Gore Verbinski movies? I'd love to hear all that down below as well. What do you think the direction should have been for a future sequel? I don't really know what I would have done since I don't know Lone Ranger lore at all. But, man, this was fun as shit. Have you ever seen the original Lone Ranger stuff? Is it any good? Is it way better than this? I have like 30 episodes in a box set that my a family member gave to me recently. Not as in like an inheritance thing, but just gave away to me. So I haven't tried it yet. I thought about trying it pretty soon because of how much I enjoyed this. So maybe I'll cover that for the channel sometime. Anyway, thank you all for watching, guys. Again, sorry for a 20-minute long rambly-ass review, but what's new with me? God bless you guys. Catch you later. Have a great weekend, and goodbye.